All right, we're about to dive into one of the most challenging observations ever made about human psychology. This comes from Viktor Frankl's experience in the Nazi concentration camps. And honestly, it's a revelation that kind of shakes our whole understanding of what good and evil really are. So let's just start with a deeply uncomfortable question. What happens when people who are being victimized are suddenly given power over other victims? Well, the answer, tragically, was found inside the camps. Frankel saw this specific group of people who were trapped in this terrifying gray area. They weren't just victims anymore, but they weren't exactly the oppressors either. They were called capos, and it is absolutely crucial to understand who they were. These were not SS guards. They were fellow prisoners, handpicked from the crowd and given authority over everyone else. And that's the whole dilemma, right? You have to get this. They were prisoners. They eat the same disgusting food, they wore the same rags, they faced the exact same threat of death as every other person there. They were one of them. But what Frankel saw happen next was a total breakdown of that shared identity. And it led to acts of cruelty that are almost impossible to imagine. You see, Frankel's observation, and this is just chilling, was that many of these capos didn't just play the part. They often became even more cruel, more sadistic than the actual SS guards themselves. Just let that sink in for a second. We're not talking about random violence against strangers. In some cases, these capos would inflict horrific beatings on people they knew personally, people who, just a few weeks before, had been their friends. And, sometimes the why behind it was just brutal survival. A desperate play to get on the good side of the guards. But the method they chose was torture. They literally used the pain of their fellow prisoners as a bargaining chip for their own life. And for some, it went even deeper than that, beyond any kind of calculated cruelty. Frankel witnessed a complete transformation, where it seemed like every last drop of empathy or basic human decency had just evaporated. They became a perfect tool for the very system that was destroying them. So after seeing all of this, all these horrifying things, Frankel came to a pretty profound psychological conclusion about what this kind of extreme pressure can do to a regular person. And it's this: oppression can awaken the monster in ordinary people. Think about that. The very act of being victimized can, in fact, create a perpetrator. And this was the darkest revelation of all. Because it meant that evil wasn't just something out there that the bad guys had. No, it was a seed, a potential, that exists inside anyone, just waiting for the right terrible conditions to sprout. This revelation then leads to an even more unsettling truth, one that just strips away any certainty we think we have about who people are. Maybe the most terrifying part of this whole thing was just how unpredictable it all was. Frankel saw people he would have sworn were decent become monsters, and others who you might have written off become heroes. There was just no way to know who would be who. So what this really reveals is that we don't have one single fixed human nature. We have two totally different potentials, the saint and the monster, living side by side inside of us all the time. And this all leads us to the final and maybe most important conclusion. One that takes this observation out of the history books and puts it right in front of you and me. Look, at the end of the day, the capacity for cruelty that the capos showed and the decency shown by the people who resisted, neither one is unique. That same duality, that same fork in the road, exists inside every single one of us. And that's where we have to end it. This horror story from the past becomes a deeply personal question for right now. The potential for both lives inside you. The only real question left is, which one are you going to choose?